Hello, this is Anna Marie Steffenson. Welcome to a little corner of my studio. Today I was hoping to talk with you about palettes. I remember one of my first students asked me about laying out a palette, and he didn't even know how much paint to put in. So let's go through that. First, I'm going to go through a variety of my palettes. What we have in front of here is some of the palettes that I've kept over the multiple years. We have my watercolor dot cards here with the colors that I'm currently working on and focused on and just enjoying exploring. First watercolor palette is from university 20 years ago. It is a Robert E. Wood watercolor palette. And the nice thing about this is that it has a dust cover and it keeps the dust out of this. So I've used this for 2 decades and it is breaking a little bit along the edge, right there, but not too bad. And as you can see, it is has wells in the lid to use. One thing I can observe with having this be a plastic item that is over 20 years old is that the plastic is becoming more brittle and it is yellowing slightly. Another negative thing about plastic is that it stains with some of the colors. But in college you can't afford a butcher tray or large ceramic palette, which were some of the other things that were recommended. Now, part of the fun thing about these palettes are learning how my my art theory and my color theory has shifted and changed. All right, you can see how I've laid out my palette here with blue in the corner going towards green. Then I have my ochres, earth, siennas, which I love so much, red, turquoise, and it's a hodgepodge of the colors that I had. And what I would do is I put the pigment on the raised angle of it so that in the, you don't want that blue in there, in the well, you can get a puddle of water very nicely. And again, this is 20 years old, and the really phenomenal thing about watercolor is that it does not expire. If you buy great quality watercolors, which I'm a brand ambassador for Daniel Smith, you can see that if you buy really great watercolors, they never expire and they keep going. From this palette, you can see that I have used some other brands also. So you can see this one right here, that the pigment actually is changing texture right here. And that's not a Daniel Smith brand, you can see that. Okay, so you have the large mixing wells, and I love that it's on all 4 sides of the palette. I've seen other palettes that it only has it on 3 sides of the palette here. So I like it on all 4 because I used them all. And then you have the center part for mixing. And then you also have the lid for more wells of washes. This is a really interesting palette for me because my philosophy in watercolor color theory has changed since then. 20 years ago, I thought if I could just mix the right blue, if I could mix a warm and a cool, then I would get a perfect blue. Or the same with yellow. If I mix a warm and a cool, I'd get a perfect yellow. And that might be theory, but it does not work that way at all. That is not color practice at all. And I learned the hard way, and that just launched me onto this journey of color, of exploring and deep diving and not coming up for air because I enjoy it so much. So the watercolor practice. All right, so this is the Robert E. Wood palette that I used from 20 years ago. I hope that is helpful. Next, what we have is, this is also an old palette, and I used a tin. It's a chocolate truffle, but I've also used Altoids tins before. And then on the inside, I put a piece of paper so that I can paint out the colors. And then I placed, this is my a little landscape palette that I had pulled together when I lived in Oklahoma, in Red Rock Country in Chickasaw Nation. And I have my ultramarine, cerulean, Daniel Smith yellow ochre, Daniel Smith jadeite, alizarin crimson, azo yellow, and pigment yellow 151. which is a... Okay, so the interesting thing I'm observing about this palette, I haven't used it very much for landscape, just a little bit. And what I can see is this pigment yellow 151 is in fact corroding the metal. And I can see that also with the cerulean, it's corroding the metal. And you can see it a little bit on the paper, how it's behaving. So you can also see what I've done in the center is I have used some sort of sealant, whatever was left over. Oh, I think it was from sealing the bathtub. I have some sealant in here, and I made myself wells to keep the pigments some separated, but also then some room to mix the colors at the base. And then you can see I put the colors up on the very high edges so that I can reach in and touch the yellow and mix it in the well, but still keep it clean. Still keep the color clean without it getting corroded or dirty. Alrighty. So that's an old watercolor palette that I had developed specifically for landscapes. And again, working with what I've got. Put that over there. Okay, these are the previous palettes I've used. I don't use these very much, just for when I'm working on a simple, short project because their wells are too shallow. And then these are two more recent wells. This is the one that I used for several years with figure drawing. And again, it's plastic. So you can see I like these wells that have 7 wells each in each one. One thing I don't like about it is that they absorb the color. So I haven't actually scrubbed these with soap, so I don't know if these ones will get much cleaner, but they absorb the color. This was the one that I used for years and years with figure drawing while I lived in Chickasaw Nation, and this is my current one. And I decided to upgrade because I am doing bigger and bigger paintings and my wells are too small for my paintbrushes. So as you get bigger, I was needing something that fit the larger paintbrushes. I did, however, love this palette right here because I could, in the center, I mix a neutral. I'd put a little bit of each color right on this edge lip, and then in the middle, I could make a very nice mixed neutral, and then I would work with a mix in here that was mostly yellow, a mix in here that was mostly red, a mix in here that was mostly blue. And then in these individual corners, what I found so helpful was that you could put the pure pigment that I wouldn't mix at all so that you had access to tube color, but most of the palette you were working with was a mixture, because you don't want your whole painting to be tube color. That's very undeveloped, in my opinion and perception of watercolor work. And I've also fallen into that experience multiple times myself. So what I find is when I set up a palette at the beginning, what happens is the colors are more bright and cheerful and tube colors, and as the palette itself matures, the colors of the painting mature. All right, and then what we have here is my current figure drawing palette, and I have set this up very specifically for my figure drawing. So I have colors for skin tones, lights, darks, and what we have here, and I've really been enjoying celebrating and exploring granulation, and the granulation in a portrait. And people have been telling me you're not supposed to use granulation in portrait, they just don't work well together. So of course that's exactly what I do, and I love it. Touches the soul. As I'm working with this palette, I realized I do need more. I need to simplify the colors in here and not have so many, and I need to, so many, such as I had multiple reds, multiple yellows, and I needed to simplify it to make it more harmony with the colors. But I realized, so I can't have, watercolor has the specific characteristics, so I couldn't have both high granulation and high transparency. So what I'm going to do a little later is have a create a palette just for the transparent colors for figure drawing. And I very well, as I'm changing and developing, very well will go and bring both palettes as I paint. It'll be a mess coming home, but that's okay. So in this palette, what we had was garnet, sodalite, goethite, Monte Amiata. So if you look at this, it's really goethite and sodalite that are granulating. I don't know that I have a granulating red in my palette. I have so many beautiful granulations. All right, when I set up the palette, I also had a mix of the other colors in here, but I'm pulling back and not refilling those colors. And as you can see here, you can keep the old paint, leave it in your palette, and keep reusing it over and over and over. And your palette actually matures. And something called the mother in your palette matures. And I really find that makes the artwork more elevated. All right, so that is my current working watercolor palette that I use for figure drawing. Thank you for starting to explore palettes with me. I hope this is helpful for you as you explore, and please continue on the journey as we go through this together. Wishing you all joy in your watercolor journey. Thanks.